So, Crimson Moon Semblance. What does its lore reveal to us, and why is it important? Well, I'd like to start with why I decided to even talk about this topic in particular. There is a ton of lore in version 4.6, in fact, there is too much lore to cover. Between all the khaenri'ah lore, Arlecchino lore, Remuria lore and Petrichor lore and stuff, I figured that most people would probably be focusing on Arlecchino or Remuria lore in general, which is why I chose this more of a niche topic, so that I don't repeat what others already did and better. Even though I say this, I may still make a video about these in the future once I make some more research on these. First, I have to make a small disclaimer as always. This is just a theory and not facts. I unfortunately can't read the developers' minds, and I just have to let them cook. So please don't be mad at me if I miss something or if I end up just being completely wrong in some cases. This is just my opinion. Now, I want to quickly talk about why this weapon is very closely tied to the lore of Arlecchino. So, we already know that Arlecchino is in fact from khaenri'ah, or at least she has a khaenri'ah bloodline. And not an ordinary one at that, but the Crimson Moon bloodline, which was basically a royal bloodline from the Crimson Moon dynasty. But more on that later, because all I talked about right now will be important once I start talking about the actual weapon. A small little detail you may notice in the game is that Arlecchino doesn't have the unique diving mechanics of Fontainians, nor does she have the Uja or Numa alignments. Which basically confirms that, as she said in her story quest, she is indeed not from Fontaine. Anyway, it is basically confirmed that she is very closely tied to the lore of khaenri'ah and Perinheri, because even Piero recommended that book to her when she asked him about what he can tell her about her origins. By the way, I still can't get over the fact that Piero was basically like, "You want to know more about your origins? Well, then go read the lore, ma'am." Anyway, everything the weapon lore tells us is somehow some way connected to her bloodline and the lore of khaenri'ah. Even Dainsleif says in her collected miscellany that she has the crimson blood running through her veins. And it is also confirmed multiple times throughout her character story, as I already mentioned. By the way, don't ask me how I got these constellations and weapon. I definitely didn't sell my left kidney to get that C4 and the weapon. But all jokes aside, I don't spend that much money on this game, but it's really great for a Arlecchino main like me to see that her lore is as interesting as I wished it to be. Anyway, let's look at the lore of the Crimson Moon Semblance now. The weapon is described as a keen-edged weapon, luster dazzling as the Crimson Moon. It is said that an ancient dynasty once regarded it as a ritual object that could bridge the two worlds, but none still remember the beliefs and ceremonies of that bygone age. Well, I think Piero and Dainsleif and some others may still remember, but whatever. Even from this description we can already see some interesting lore. The first thing that comes to mind is that this weapon was used back in khaenri'ah, probably in the Crimson Moon dynasty, for rituals to somehow connect the two worlds, even though I don't really know what that means yet. But the two worlds this description talks about are obviously the two worlds in Arlecchino's boss title, Cinder of the Two Worlds Flames. And also this whole version 4.6 is named Two Worlds of Flame, the Crimson Night Fates. If I were to speculate what this could mean, then the only things this could refer to, that I can think of right now, are either the two khaenri'ah dynasties, which actually could make a lot of sense, since later in this video I'll talk about how they both ended in flames, and the titles of both this version and Arlecchino's boss fight seem to fit this description. Or there is also the Crimson Moon and the Dark Sun, which comes to mind, or even the two words in regards to the upside down theory of Teyvat, which is a long-standing theory in the lore community that talks about Teyvat actually being originally upside down. There is some evidence to support this pretty old theory, and that is for example the fact that the lower we go in the spiral abyss, the better we can see the sky and the abyssal moon. Or the fact that khaenri'ahs called the skies of Teyvat fake skies. Then there is the upside down city in the chasm, or even the upside down statue, the Abyss Order, displayed in one of the Dainsleif quests. Then there is also Irminsul and the whole stuff about its roots being the ley lines that go towards the surface, which means up rather than down. So Irminsul is supposedly upside down as well, and there are many other examples. But one example that also suggests this upside down theory applies to khaenri'ah is that we know that it was khaenri'ah that summoned our sibling, and maybe even us, which means that they can summon someone from outer space. And they also had astronomers, which were studying the fake skies, and there was even a Crimson Moon and a Dark Sun, which means that khaenri'ah couldn't have been underground. At least that's what this theory suggests. But this is a highly speculative theory, and I could be completely wrong here. Maybe I'm just missing something very obvious. But the speculation aside, the two worlds are obviously connected to Perinheri as well, as they are mentioned in that story too, and Perinheri ties closely to Arlecchino as I already mentioned. Well, now let's take a look at the actual lore of this weapon. I won't read all of it, I'll just talk about the parts that I find important or interesting for the purpose of this video. At the very beginning, it talks about the era before the Dark Sun's light eliminated the underground, so it seems to be describing the time before the Crimson Moon was present in khaenri'ah, and apparently the king of that time was convinced by others that the remnants of the Crimson Moon in the sky ruled all. After that, the King of Humanity, as is worded in this description, took upon himself the name of the Crimson Moon, and he decided to judge fate by the flame of the two words. As I already said, I don't know exactly what these two words are referring to, but the King of Humanity probably refers to the King of khaenri'ah, as it was said to be a nation built entirely by humans, without any gods. Also, I'm guessing that the Crimson Moon is in fact the giant eye mentioned in khaenri'ah, since it was kinda confirmed by Piero that the details of that story are all true. Which is very interesting because that could be connected to why King Irmin was blind in one eye. Maybe he replaced this one eye with the eye of the Crimson Moon, or maybe it was the other way around. I don't know, it probably wouldn't make much sense since King Irmin is supposed to be the last king of khaenri'ah before the Cataclysm, which would mean that he had to rule during the Eclipse dynasty and not the Crimson Moon dynasty, but there still seems to be a connection. Maybe that's a thing that was kept as a tradition or something. At the very least, it's safe to say that the eye symbolism keeps appearing more and more as time goes on, and it sure is a very nice coincidence that it's mentioned both in regards to Crimson Moon dynasty and King Irmin. The description then describes how they prayed for the long dead Crimson Moon to bring them salvation. Well, I don't know what they mean by long dead, but it sure sounds ominous. But if this Crimson Moon refers to one of the Moon sisters, then the fact that they are long dead could make sense. Then there is a mention of the inverted image of the false sky, which brings us back to what I talked about earlier. The inverted image brings us back to the upside down PA, together with the false sky. And then it just talks about how the flames of doubt and fury burned everything, which corresponds pretty well with all of our visions of khaenri'ah Cataclysm so far. Which at first glance makes sense, but then you realize that the Crimson Moon dynasty wasn't the last dynasty of khaenri'ah, because that was the Eclipse dynasty. So I wonder if the Crimson Moon dynasty met the same end as the Eclipse one, even with the same curse possibly. Maybe this is another samsara or something of that sort. It seems that there is still some missing information. Then, after the Crimson Moon faded, only the Pale Moon remained to stain the lingering remains, which obviously reminds me of the Arlecchino's title Dire Pale Moon. I wonder if this has some hidden meaning. Then it talks about the khaenri'ah curse that the people suffered from, and how the few that survived remained hiding in the shadows, where the sun did not shine. Which oddly reminds me of khaenri'ah and how she could only appear in the shadows, and how Arlecchino described that sometimes when she uses her power, something from her memories appear as after images. Anyway, we know for sure now that Arlecchino is a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty, which is why the Pale Moon bloodfire is running through her veins. From this text, it seems like the people who survived started hiding, and they also seem to have abandoned the Crimson Moon, because the next dynasty of khaenri'ah is called the Eclipse dynasty instead. Maybe it's because of what the astronomers mentioned in this story have seen beyond the fake sky. But we can be sure that at some point, khaenri'ah's Crimson Moon was replaced by a dark sun, and therefore they abandoned the Crimson Moon, which could be connected to the truth of Teyvat, which in this context probably refers to the stuff described in Before Sun and Moon, aka the stuff about the Primordial One, Heavenly Principles and so on, which suggests that the Crimson Moon could indeed be related to the three Moon Sisters and the Primordial One, and it could also be connected to why the book that talks about the Primordial One is called Before Sun and Moon in the first place. I wonder if this moon in the title is the Crimson Moon, and if khaenri'ah somehow angered Celestia because they chose to worship the Crimson Moon instead of the Dark Sun. I originally thought that this Dark Sun could symbolize Celestia, but now that I think about it, it wouldn't really make much sense, since the gods are supposedly the ones who destroyed the Eclipse dynasty of khaenri'ah, and I have no idea why they would destroy a civilization that worships them. Anyway, there is probably something we are still missing, because otherwise the sun representing the Primordial One or Celestia would make a lot of sense, and it would fit nicely with the stuff like the title of Before Sun and Moon. It would also be pretty funny since khaenri'ahs seem to have a lot of pride in the fact that they don't worship any god, yet we already know from this weapons lore that they at least worship the Crimson Moon, whether that is a god or not. And in case I am right about this bit of my theory, they also worship something close to the Heavenly Principles, which sounds crazy to say at this point. Well, this part was very speculative, so let's move on. They were waiting for the Crimson Moon to decree their desire for vengeance to be repaid, but that never happened, and the Dark Sun fell to the same ignorance and arrogance. I think that in this part of the story, the Crimson Moon is more symbolic, and it probably refers to some stuff the Crimson Moon dynasty tried to achieve and couldn't, whatever it was. And now they are waiting for some sort of vengeance, which reminds me of how the Abyss Order seems to seek some sort of vengeance against the gods that destroyed khaenri'ah, but I can't say for sure if these two are related. Then there is a tyrannical usurper mentioned, which makes me wonder if this is in some way connected to the Primordial One, even though I have no idea how khaenri'ah could be connected to this topic. And this could also be connected to the lines in Dainsleif's Drape Marketing, where he says that the eclipse is followed by the Crimson Moon. I wonder if this has something to do with the Crimson Moon and the vengeance they talk about. Maybe this is some sort of foreshadowing, but it all happened way back in the past, so who knows. Anyway, the last few lines are very interesting, and they read as such. If the destiny she wove mocks us so, then let us mock destiny as loudly as we may, until the last shadow of the ashen sun burns away the old world, until the Crimson Moon witnesses the immaculate dawn. So the first thing that caught my eye is the she mentioned here, because who could this possibly be referring to? Maybe the sustainer of heavenly principles? I don't know. The destiny she wove immediately makes me think of the loom of fate, because weaving the destiny is basically the same thing. Also the phrase, burns away the old world, reminds me of what Piero said in the Winternight's Lazo trailer. If you remember that one line towards the end of that teaser, where he says to Rosalind, "Your final resting place will be the entirety of the old world." And since he was a royal mage of the same dynasty this weapon talks about, I think this is the same old world he mentioned in the teaser. Anyway, this is it for this highly speculative video. I hope you enjoyed the new lore as much as I did. Unfortunately, right now I don't have much time on my hands, as I have a lot of upcoming exams. But hopefully this video was helpful even though I don't have the time to make as much research as I usually do. I will probably make some more videos on Arlecchino related lore in the future, so I really hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one.